Hayward. I've been asked to present today regarding the common pitfalls, so the things that might go wrong, particularly when we're starting out in our medtech journey. Now, the first question is, why me? Why am I providing this presentation? Well, as you can see, I've got a few academic credentials, and I started life as a natural scientist at Cambridge University, and I moved into more neurosciences and medical imaging for my PhD. So I started getting involved in medtech many, many years ago now, about 15 years ago. And it was during my PhD that I realized, oh, actually, it's great to share technology with society. And one way to do that, of course, is to become a medical doctor, as I'm sure many of you are. And I came and did my PhD, my medical studies at Imperial College in London. And after that, I've been in clinical practice now for about a decade. And that includes mostly anesthesia. But recently, I became a fellow of the Royal College of Radiologists. So my clinical specialization is radiology. I also work commercially, so I have been assisting companies on their startup medtech journey for quite a few years now, just mostly in my own time as a paid consultant. And one of my roles is as a clinical safety officer, which I'll come on to. So thank you very much for joining. Hopefully I've got lots of things to share. I'll keep this presentation very brief so that we've got plenty of time for questions and discussions. Okay. So brief introduction. The medtech startup journey has many possible pitfalls, but I've been thinking about the presentation title and I've come up with 6 that I think are really crucial to success. Briefly, the first one is that we have to make sure that our products and services address a clear clinical need. And I'll come on to why this is crucial and how we can make sure it happens. The second one is, and this is actually related to the first one, is we need to make sure that we engage early with clinical professionals who might be the stakeholders or users of our products and services in medtech. Similarly, and again, I'm slightly biased as a clinical safety officer, but I think that early engagement with clinical safety is crucial because clinical safety underpins so much of what we do and so many of our sales in the medtech world. And it's not just an event, it's a process, which again, I'll come on to describe more. Very, very few technologies stand alone in isolation, and therefore integration with other systems is absolutely crucial. If we don't integrate, we might fall into a bit of a trap on our medtech journey. Of course, funding is something that everyone talks about in the business world, and it is crucial for sustainability, particularly in regards to cash flow, not just funding in the long term, but cash flow is crucial, and we'll come on to that briefly. And then the final pitfall is making sure that we have a good cultural fit among our team players. And this is, again, all about sustainability and growth within the early stage of a business, especially. Now, as we mentioned briefly, some of you might just be joining us. So if you do have questions, you are welcome to open your microphone and interrupt me. That's totally fine. But I'll whiz through these slides and we will have plenty of time for discussion at the end. So let's see how we go. And of course, the hosts do feel free to interrupt me if anything changes. I'll be looking at my presentation, so I might not see you. So the first common pitfall is that we don't address a clear clinical need with our products and services. So why does this happen? Well, typically it happens because many technologists, engineers, scientists, and some medics will build a technology because they've got the capacity and the skills to do so. It's kind of like technology because we can. Now, that's all well and good, but even if a technology looks fancy and is very impressive and maybe advances the field in which it's in, it has to address a clear clinical need. So indeed, your amazing technology may have novel applications, and that's great. However, medicine and clinical pathways are very, very complex. In fact, innovating in medtech is very different to other spaces. It's not like you can just make a product and start to generate sales. It's just not that straightforward. And given the complexity of clinical pathways, we need to make sure that all technologies fit into these pathways, and therefore making sure that whatever the clinical need truly is actually being addressed is just so important. Because when we're designing new products and services or new technologies, the engineering principle is design, build, and test. But we don't want to be going through the process of multiple costly redesigns, because if we address the clear clinical need in the first instance, we're more likely to generate technology that is directly applicable to the needs of the stakeholders, for example, the clinicians or indeed patients or other service providers who need the tech. So how do we do this? Okay, how do we navigate around this pitfall? Well, it's not easy because of the complexity of clinical pathways. It's absolutely crucial to start out on the medtech startup journey with an immersive evaluation of the clinical needs that relate to your technology. And that's why it's important to assess your technology in context. How do we do that? Well, there are many different methods. One in particular is the Stanford Biodesign model. And I've been a lecturer on the Stanford Biodesign course in Finland, where I've done some research time. And this is a program that's internationally applied now. There are many biodesign programs out there. There's a very, very large textbook of the biodesign principles. But the key thing is this: you tend to spend, if you join a biodesign program, you tend to spend around a year working with a multidisciplinary team of professionals. And the key thing is that the first part of the year is spent in clinical settings. You're starting to figure out what true clinical needs are long before actual products and services are generated or created or designed and built. And it's this immersive opportunity that is a real asset of the biodesign program. So if you're interested in learning more about this, it's something to look into. There's lots of information on the biodesign website. And again, you can probably find a biodesign program close to where you are. So pitfall number 2. How do we make sure that we address the clinical need, and how do we make sure that we do this with the end users in mind? We make sure that we engage early with clinical professionals and other stakeholders, including patients, if indeed your technology is patient-facing. So why must we do this? Well, quite frankly, the experts are out there, and they are in a very, very, very good position to be able to identify whether or not your technology is a likely fit based on the pathways, the existing technologies, the processes that are already in place in their clinical practice. So if we engage early with those experts, again, we can make sure that the startup journey begins with ideal design, ideal testing, and ideal implementation. So let's just focus on that in a little bit more detail. If we engage with clinical professionals and other stakeholders, other people involved in the medtech process, if we do that early, then hopefully the technology that we're creating will serve their needs. And again, the clinical needs, as mentioned in point 1. But we must consider all users as well. And this will vary a little bit depending on the product or service that you're working on. I would say that all users must be considered. And in research, for example, there's a very, very big push rightly towards patient and public involvement. Indeed, ethics committees ensure that we make sure that we do appropriate involvement with patient groups. And this is crucial because, again, patients have needs. If our technologies are serving patients directly, we need to make sure that their needs are included in the design of our technologies. Now, even if you've got great ideas, even if you've got a great team around you, your vision may not fit the clinical needs because you perhaps don't have in your team enough experience within the domain in which you're hoping to innovate. And that's very natural. I've unfortunately seen many different technology companies creating products and services when they haven't really engaged with clinical professionals. And unfortunately, they have to go back to almost square one in order to continue to further their business. And that's something we'd rather avoid. So how do we do this? Well, again, it's not straightforward because clinical professionals and patients and everyone else, we're very busy people. Consequently, it can be difficult if you're not surrounded by clinicians in your line of work or your line of study. Therefore, one has to try and network and engage at an early stage and try and join as many events as possible where you can get different perspectives, different opinions, and find opportunities for that immersive experience that I mentioned previously. Sometimes we need to do real-world research as well. There is research already out there that might be relevant to your space, so literature reviews will be helpful. But in addition, working with those who are in a similar space or related technologies will be very, very beneficial at an early stage. So those are the first 2 pitfalls: clinical needs and engaging early with appropriate stakeholders, including patients. Pitfall number 3. Early engagement with clinical safety. I've noticed I've repeated clinical there twice accidentally. Now, the reason for this is that clinical safety is absolutely paramount, and it is a process rather than an event. Some organizations and some companies will treat their clinical safety as an entire entity on its own. Unfortunately, it's more of a live process that occurs from the moment a new technology is created. If we then apply that technology and we develop that technology, the safety considerations around that technology are dynamic. They will continue to evolve as the technology evolves. That's why clinical safety is a process. So with that in mind, it's worth mentioning that clinical safety is quite complex. Therefore, there are various requirements depending on where you are in the world. I've just listed a few of them here that may be alien to you. Don't worry, there's a lot of terminology. So in the National Health Service, we have the DCB requirements, or the Data Coordination Board requirements. For manufacturers of digital technologies, you have to be compliant with the regulations of DCB 0129. Again, this is a process with documented evidence to show that your company, your medtech startup, is compliant with the safety regulations. This is essential, not just for the integrity of your business, but because it protects patients. In addition, being compliant with these requirements allows you to generate sales. Because if you want to sell your technology to the National Health Service or other healthcare providers, you need to make sure that you're compliant with these. And similarly, there's an equivalent protocol called the 0160, and again, another DCB requirement, and this is on the side of the healthcare provider. So they will be aligning your technology and your safety case with their requirements, and that's why the DCB requirements are so critical in the UK. You may have heard of DTAC. This is the assessment criteria for digital technologies, and really it is absolutely crucial to make sure that, particularly if selling to the NHS, that you are DTAC ready. There's lots of information about this online. Again, it's all about safety, interoperability of what your technology provides. And this is crucial because if you're not DTAC ready, then again, it can be very difficult to have a sustainable business model. You may well have heard of the Medicines and Health Regulatory Authority, or the MHRA. If you have a medical device, or even if you're developing a medical device in the UK, you have to make early notification to the MHRA, and therefore they provide appropriate regulatory approval of your device. And you may be aware there are classes of medical devices that are absolutely crucial to fit into, and it's that categorization of classes that will dictate what evidence you need to prove, or at least evidence, safety and efficacy of your digital device or your actual hardware device as well. Outside of the UK, we have to be concerned, perhaps in North America, with the Food and Drug Administration requirements, or the FDA requirements, and they will have a slightly different process. So if you want to sell in North American markets, again, you have to meet FDA requirements regarding safety and efficacy. Hopefully that begins to justify why early engagement with clinical safety requirements is just so important. And as I've already hinted at, this is a process, it's not an event. Hazards and risks must be evaluated and controlled for. So your controls of how you're mitigating any risks that your technology introduces into a patient care pathway of any sort, you have to be able to evidence how you control for those risks, meaning what measures have you got in place? How are we making sure that patients are protected with the technology that you perhaps are planning or indeed trying to implement? And this, as I say, is a process. And given that it's a process, a continuous re-evaluation is required. It's not a single event, it's something that needs to be done as your technology evolves. And as I've mentioned, the integrity of what you're doing in your medtech startup, the safety of your own work and the safety of patients and any other service users require early engagement with the safety requirements. And ultimately, now we're leaning towards an era where top healthcare institutions won't look at products and services until they are absolutely sure that they meet the safety requirements. And therefore, your own business sales and revenue streams will depend on clinical safety. So how do we go about making sure that we're safe? Well, it's not something you can necessarily do on your own as a startup, and therefore expert help is required. There are many clinical safety officers out there now. These are individuals in the UK, for example, who are registered healthcare professionals. They may be medical doctors or nurses, paramedics, occupational therapists, and they've got additional qualifications where they can oversee the process of ensuring compliance with the DCB 0129 or 0160 regulations. So it's important to engage early with clinical safety officers. There are also courses that one can do in order to get members of your startup team more familiar with the safety requirements. And you can start to ask organizations about procurement. I mean, how do they go about purchasing products and services in the health tech space? Well, the National Health Service has very strict procurement pathways, and those pathways will be clear about what safety requirements they need to see for the technology that you're working on. So you can go and make inquiries with the procurement team in various places. So hopefully I've drummed home there pretty firmly just how important clinical safety is. Pitfall number 4. Integration with other systems. Now, I've seen many technologies, on a personal note, that sadly don't integrate very well with other technologies that are already in place within the healthcare ecosystem. And that's a great shame, because products and services cannot work well in isolation. It's absolutely crucial that whatever technology you're working with, you develop it in such a way that you know that it's going to integrate. And this is very important on the technical side. It must integrate with existing other software, for example, or if you're working on a medical device and perhaps surgeons will use the device, you have to make sure that it's compatible with the way surgical devices are managed and handled. And will it integrate well with other surgical equipment that's already in place? And these are important questions to ask at an early stage, again, because it allows your medtech products and services to be developed in the right context. Importantly, when we look at the National Health Service, for example, the workflow with digital safety in particular and digital software, this is highly variable between regions and services. So if you've got a system in place, for example, electronic patient records in the general practice setting, that might be different from the same electronic patient records in secondary care in hospitals. And therefore, you have to think very carefully, how is your software going to integrate with the existing software in primary care? Well, that might require a certain build in terms of software development. Equally, software development in secondary care might need to be different again. So you may almost need 2 different versions of your technology to suit the right setting. Importantly, if you hope that other pathways will adjust to your disruption of your new technology, it's sadly rarely the case. And that's because, particularly in established safe healthcare pathways, software and other devices are very well established. And that means there can be some rigidity, and it can be quite difficult to make sure that you integrate safely and smoothly. So the way I approach this is to think about what I call blended efficiency. You may have some elements of your product or service that are unique, but there has to be this integration and alignment with existing systems. And if we have that systems mentality in the startup groove, interoperability can be achieved. And this is crucial, or else it's highly unlikely that your standalone software will ever be sustainable. Again, how do we do this? Well, you're not on your own. There are plenty of experts out there who have a very good understanding of what systems are already in place. They're probably the clinical and non-clinical stakeholders related to your technology space. Engage with them early, run small but targeted pilot studies that ask a clear question regarding integration. And again, trying to do this at an early stage is crucial, because having fantastic software or hardware that just doesn't integrate is a big pitfall. Number 5, sustainability through funding. Well, this should be relatively straightforward. You've seen that the Medtech team that often appear in this presentation there on the right of the screen have decided that cash flow is king, and they're not wrong. They're not wrong. The reason for this is that sometimes we have funding, as in big organizations might provide funding to a business, But that doesn't necessarily mean that all of the money is immediately available at all times. In fact, it may be provided in certain increments over a certain time period. All businesses will have expenditure, whether that's paying staff salaries, whether that's providing, purchasing legal help, whether that's looking for any kind of space or time, whatever it is that the business needs, there will need to be a cash flow, because even the smallest of operations require a continuous stream of cash flow to at least keep up with the expenditure that happens every month. Now, this may seem really straightforward, but many businesses, both in medtech and beyond, really struggle with the fact that cash flow is not always well taken care of. And therefore, I think it's important to look at funding in terms of long-term sustainable funding packages, perhaps from investors, as well as sustainable cash flow, which may be partly related to revenue or sales. Unfortunately, in the medtech space, you may need to innovate and develop a lot of your technology before you even start to generate revenue. And therefore, making sure that there is a cash flow is crucial. And if there isn't, I've seen many fantastic startups sadly be unsustainable because they haven't got the cash flow. Because simply put, cash flow allows our operations to continue. As mentioned, funding or big funding, project funding, big packages can secure cash flow sustainably, but it might be delayed. And this is because sometimes there will be a funding agreement in place, particularly seen in research funding, where there will be certain deliverables required before the funding agency will release more of the funding over a certain period of time. So we can't just rely on big sums of funding to provide us with a cash flow. It's not always that straightforward. The sources of funding will depend very much on the stage of your company and the needs of your company and the needs of your technology as well. Some people start out early on with crowdfunding if you've got something that might be of great value to society at large, and this is often a very good way to go, particularly to raise initial capital. Some people approach angel investors, and these are typically individuals or groups of individuals who will come together and provide early investment in what you're doing with your medtech startup. Of course, they will expect a certain percentage of the business, so you have to choose wisely who you want to work with. And then perhaps at a slightly later stage, people will go to venture capital, which is usually provided by larger groups of financiers who can provide large sums of money to businesses that are starting to become established. Again, they will want a reasonably large slice of the pie, making sure that they take part ownership of your business. So again, you have to be very careful about how you want to move forward with regards to funding. If you have research projects in mind, some businesses can apply for research funding in the same way that academics do. So there's some government incentives and charity-based incentives out there as well. So how do we make things sustainable through funding? Well, it's all about establishing evidence. If you can evidence that your products and services are beneficial, it's likely to raise the eyebrow of investors in a positive way and also get the attention of the large funding bodies, such that they will hopefully buy into what you're doing and allow you to be sustainable for the medium or short to medium term. Therefore, how do we convince them? Well, have to have really clear plans here. If you're not really clear about the trajectory of your business or where the products and services need to go, then it's unlikely that someone will buy into what you're doing. Similarly, pitching is perfect. For example, if you don't have a clear business case, a clear business plan, and a clear business pitch, it can be really difficult for people to be convinced of the sustainability of what you're doing and its potential future value. And if I'm honest, I find that funding can be a bit of a continual pursuit. I've never founded a company. I'm not a startup entrepreneur myself. I've supported other companies, but I've noticed that other companies are really going through this continual pursuit for funding in order to make what they're doing sustainable. And it can be a very, very difficult way of life for some people and some companies. The final pitfall, as I promised, whizzing through this today, this is great. Pitfall number 6 is ensuring a cultural fit among team players. Now, it may sound really obvious because none of us like working with people who we just don't get along very well with, but I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. It's important because the right people in your business tend to stick around gladly and everyone wins. So not only are we looking for people that you naturally get on well with, if you've got the right skill mix and you've got the right values, most importantly, the right values within your company, then that company is more likely to be sustainable. And it's those values that really matter most, because that's the glue that keeps teams together. Common goals, common passions, common trajectories. And of course, you're going to need a broad mix of people when having a startup journey in any space, but particularly in medtech. Hopefully, you've got someone with clinical experience and someone with business experience, and perhaps some engineering or software development people. And if you've all got shared visions, shared goals, and there's a real harmony between you, that is absolutely crucial to sustainability. Let's look at that in a little bit more detail. It's fair to say that I've spoken with a lot of business experts, so that's not my background. I'm much more of an academic clinician, but true business experts who have developed many different businesses say time and time again that their human resources are their most valuable asset. And I think that's really worth paying attention to, in particular because skills can be learned, but the culture between the team members and the interactions that you have in the startup space create a natural flow. And then the journey becomes, well, amplified in its chances of success and sustainability. So in order to do this, a lot of companies have philosophies early on where they establish their core values. These are really soft things that they're so important. They make clear what the company values. They make clear where we might be headed, where the ship is sailing towards. It's not just about the technology, it's about the bigger picture, how the technology might evolve, what might yet come next. And of course, if everyone has shared and similar motivations and certain rules in place to allow comfortable frameworks of working, then again, it's more sustainable and it's more likely to succeed. So how do we do this? Well, if you're one of the founders of a company, I'd encourage you not to kiss too many frogs. That's what someone said to me once who is a startup entrepreneur. And unfortunately, he noticed that he was looking at people who were very, very well qualified, bringing them into the company at an early stage, but the fit just wasn't there. And he hadn't evaluated this very carefully. And he was looking at impressive professionals, which is, of course, is important, but not thinking too much about how the vision would be shared, how the values aligned. And he said, I kissed too many frogs and I've had a really high turnover of staff and it's had a huge impact on his business. It's really held back his progress. So I recommend keeping the dialogue open and reflective, perhaps having probation periods where making sure everyone's mutually comfortable with what's going on in the company before taking on too much responsibility. That can be important. And I think these interactions and these decisions have to be really organic and really natural between all of the different members of the startup. So hopefully I very quickly but clearly, hopefully, outline some of the common pitfalls around medtech startups. The first one is establishing that clear clinical need, because all technology must be deployed and developed in context, the context in which it will serve. Partly solving this is early engagement with clinical professionals. This ensures that the clinical needs are really very well understood and that the systems in which those professionals work are addressed. Similarly, early engagement with patients, if your technology is patient-facing, is absolutely fundamental because we want to keep our patients safe and our patients happy. Early engagement with clinical safety, I really think I've pushed this message quite well. It's a process and everything else that we do rests on safety. And this is because even just selling our technology, we have to be very clear in evidencing where we're at with regards to the safety case. Number 4, it's important to make sure that we integrate with other systems. Again, no technology really stands alone very well in isolation. It's much more sustainable if whatever technology you're working on, it can be integrated with other systems. Number 5, in summary, is that sustainability with regards to cash flow and funding. Cash flow is something about making sure the money is flowing to enable sustained operations, and funding as well. It's that bigger picture for long-term sustainability. And then finally, as we've just mentioned, the cultural fit among your team players is huge because it allows for sustainable growth. Your human resources are a huge asset. And quite frankly, if you get on well with different members of your team and the whole team's in harmony, you can have a lot of fun with the startup process. Not only avoid these pitfalls, but they'll just be considerations in the background. The foreground will be a lot of growth, a lot of process, and hopefully sustainable technology development with a lot of safety and integrity in mind. So thank you very much for listening to me. Hopefully I've highlighted there 6 very clear pitfalls that we can navigate around. I'm very keen to now spend the rest of the session. We've got quite some time to open things up to questions and discussion. If you'd like to get in touch with me, you're very welcome to do so. As you've noticed, I'm drnickhayward.com. You can email me directly there. I'm also quite visible at Dr. Nick Hayward on those 4 platforms as well. So you're very welcome to contact me. Please do connect. Please do reach out. I'm still very much learning in the startup medtech space. So there's more I can learn from you, and I'll be thrilled to connect. So thank you for your time.
Okay, so we've got one question in the chat here. What are some of the most creative and innovative tech startups you've seen in healthcare? And have you seen any AI tech startups recently integrated into healthcare?
Great, yes. So what are the most innovative? I mean, my goodness, there are so many. There are so many. So I would say that there are any area of clinical practice you can imagine, there will be someone out there in the startup space trying to develop new products and services. So as far as your imagination can run, there are so many different possibilities. And that doesn't mean that many of them will be sustainable. Unfortunately, the vast majority of these don't gain traction, but I think the entrepreneurs involved will learn a lot from the journey that they're on. And often that technology will be transferred into some other product or service in the future, which is great. The second part of that question about the different AI options, yes. So in my space in radiology, so I'm a radiology doctor now, I work at Oxford University Hospitals as a radiologist currently. I'm still a resident doctor, but I'm coming to the end of my residency as a fellow of the Royal College of Radiologists now. And we are seeing a lot of potential innovation with AI in imaging. So what happens here is that the artificial intelligence can help us to identify subtle changes on X-rays or CT scans that might be indicative of certain pathologies. And these are built mostly with very large data sets, and they are typically deployed in certain specific use cases so that they are accurately targeting a clinical need. Now, they're starting to become widely adopted. There are some already out there that are automating processes in radiology, but where they are not replacing radiologists like myself just yet is that they don't have the capacity to contextualize the findings. You might be able to spot a blob on an X-ray that I can hopefully do and my colleagues can hopefully do, but being able to contextualize that requires relatively deep medical knowledge and medical understanding. And indeed, our Royal College exams are very broad. They require us to be good medical doctors. So yeah, so I'm seeing, but I am seeing traction now. I'm seeing that these AI technologies are coming in. The other area I would highlight, which is where I've been working myself as well as supporting one company, is working with AI-based triage. So triage is the process where we sift and sort through the urgency of cases. For example, people can approach their healthcare provider with a list of symptoms, and then historically there was often a triage nurse or a triage doctor who would look through and prioritize the clinical urgency of these cases. And we're noticing that the knowledge that doctors and other providers have can be crystallized into products, AI-based products that can do the triage step. And this is crucial because it allows us to streamline where patients might then go. If, for example, if someone has relatively self-manageable symptoms, it might be appropriate for them to go and see a pharmacist. Equally, if someone has some symptoms that they may not realize are quite serious, but we do as doctors, and an AI-based triage can also notice that too, we can expedite their care. So that's another space that I'm really excited about, is the idea that we can, and it's already happening. I'm sure if you approach your general practice doctor, most systems now online will have an AI-based triage behind it that allows them to categorize and prioritize the case that you're providing. So yeah, there's a whole new era coming, and I think we're in it, especially with artificial intelligence. Hopefully that answers your question with a few examples.
Thank you. That was a really kind of detailed answer there. And we've got another one here. So hi, thanks for the talk. I was wondering how you gained experience and first got into medtech/consulting services.
Oh, it's a great question. Yeah, thank you for your question. So I first got involved in medical technologies by just being a scientist. I like to think of myself as a technologist because my PhD studies, long time ago now, were focused on developing medical imaging, which is why it's natural for me to have gravitated into medical imaging as a clinician as well as a medical doctor. But before I got to medical school back in 2010, so between 2006 and 2010, I did my PhD. And because I was working with technologies that are directly related to healthcare, medical imaging, and trying to develop those technologies, I was also working in neuroscience. So half of my PhD was neuroscience, half was brain imaging technology development. And that blend was a great understanding of biology in combination with technology. And I started to realize just how exciting it was to be able to share knowledge and experience around those two areas of neuroscience and technology with society. So I started to get a lot of experience with, voluntarily to be honest, the local university medical school. And that inspired me to then go to medical school. But I've always gone through my clinical training with a kind of technologist hat on, if that makes sense. I would say that that's what the change was for me. So I'd say even since 2010, or even a bit before, I've been mindful of the technology space. So the second question then was, how did I get involved in the consulting side of things? Well, there's no straightforward answer to that. It varies depending on from person to person. The first thing I would say is I think it's really good to do consulting with integrity. And one way to do that is to gain experience in a certain domain and make that your particular interest. So for me, I've become a clinical safety officer, which registered healthcare professionals can do. And I've got a reasonable amount of experience now in the National Health Service, and therefore I have familiarity with the systems and the intricacies. I've also been involved in a clinical trial where I was the lead investigator, so I've been through the ethics process with that research and other research as well. And over time, I've realized that many medtech startups need people who have that experience. So I've been able to start to approach companies and say, hey, yeah, I love what you're doing. Would you perhaps need someone who has intricate knowledge of the UK NHS systems, of which there are many and many complexities to that, and someone who has an understanding of building clinical evidence, the application of technology, and has worked firsthand with patients so that I can understand that, patients' needs. And I think that's absolutely crucial to have that background experience. If you then want to get involved with these companies, you just start approaching them. And you'll be amazed that LinkedIn was, for example, this event was advertised on LinkedIn. I was approached through LinkedIn, and I'm very happy to be contacted that way. Equally, I tend to make approaches through that network, but I also go to in-person events. For example, the Giant Health Tech event is coming up at the beginning of December in London, I think around December 8th. I'll be there for one of the days. I've taken a day of annual leave, and I'll go and I'll network and I'll meet people I haven't seen before and who haven't met me. And perhaps together we can learn and apply what I do with what they do. And it really is just a question of networking, because it's not typically advertised. If you're working in the medtech space, trying to be a consultant of some sort, I think it's important to have a clear pitch, a clear offering, and clear networking, because it's not like you'll find people advertising these positions very often. The caveat to that is there are some massive consultancy firms, the McKinseys of this world, that have an entire medtech branch. So you can go and get first-hand consulting experience and learn to consult their way with them. and potentially branch out on your own, having some experience if you're interested in working with the big companies. I've not gone that route personally. My career's just gone a different way. But that's another way of doing it, is to actually go and spend some time either with an internship or actually a paid position working with the big management consultancy companies.
Awesome. Okay, so we've got a question from Don. What emerging AI or computational methods do you see having the biggest impact on drug discovery or patient care in the next 3 to 5 years?
Oh my goodness, I think it's very difficult to pick one. I think the beauty of AI is that people are approaching it from many different angles, different ways of machine learning, different large language models, whatever the technology they're working with. There are so many different strategies. When it comes to drug discovery and design, that's not my area of expertise, but I have done a couple of internships with Pfizer, big pharmaceutical company. So I'm aware that there's a real need to try and whittle down thousands of potential drug candidates into almost like a funnel into what is most likely to be successful at an early stage. I think where I see AI being so beneficial there, and again, this is already happening, is the fact that you need as much big data, if you like, as possible to be able to understand the nuances of different pharmacological impact of different functional groups on a molecule. You have to, this is so complex. If you think about just the basic structure of a drug compound, there are so many different functional groups, and all of these will have different functionality within different biological settings. For example, they may have different activity with nerve tissue compared to blood cells, compared to bone. And understanding how these drug candidates interact with their chemical and physical environment, both in the body in vivo, it's very, very complex. And computationally, there are many different possible interactions going on. So I think the drug discovery landscape is ripe for AI-based intervention, whereby we really assimilate all of that big data into understanding better how the drug molecules will interact in their clinical environment, in their biological space. There are probably many other avenues in the pharma space for AI to be really, really important for big data. If we look at public health, for example, it's very difficult to get a handle on how medications, once they're newly released, how they're going to impact at the population level. We have models, mathematical models, that can try and predict this. It's the same is true for vaccines, is that when we start to create vaccines, we have to look at and model and predict how much of an impact they will have. And again, all of the data that's gone before is going to be beneficial in designing, building, and testing these mathematical models, and hopefully yet further improving the awesome technologies of vaccines and other medications that are new once they have been released. So yeah, I think that's a very broad space. Not my expertise, but I can see many avenues that are already in progress.
Okay, so we have another question from Liber. So I think you might have touched on the answer to this, but thank you for the talk. It's been really informative. What would you say is the easiest way to get ourselves into the medtech field? Is messaging clinicians, for example, on LinkedIn, a good way to become involved in projects?
Yeah, absolutely. I get lots of approaches every day, and if I do have projects, then I'm very open to sharing. And clinicians are busy, particularly clinicians. We're very busy because we're often overworked in a healthcare environment where we're like, oh gosh, there's so much we want to do, but we have to keep the system going. And as you know, I'm sure you've seen the media attention that there are fewer and fewer of us available for the increasing demand that we're seeing internationally in healthcare. And consequently, there are often projects running where an extra pair of hands would be huge, hugely welcome, and a huge opportunity to learn and to grow. So yes, a direct approach is very welcome. I would be targeted. So if you know that someone is working in a space that interests you, it's important to share with them that your interests are their interests. Again, a little bit like pitfall number 6, there's that harmony if we have similar values in the way that we work together in medtech. However, you don't just have to approach clinicians. There are other ways. So, for example, I've recently been involved in a collaboration where we've been looking at a respiratory sensor technology that's remote and wireless. And the wearable space is huge, and there are many engineers in that space. You could approach the engineers who may have an engineering challenge, particularly if you're coming from a medical school background, because you'll have some clinical knowledge. And your clinical knowledge, even as a medical student, can go quite far. So you might find yourself getting involved in research projects or early business development projects with technologies that are really exciting that interests you. And even if that technology doesn't take off and go stratospheric, it's okay. Because being involved in understanding the process, being involved in developing technologies, we all learn so much from being involved in the process, being involved in the journey. And yeah, I think that's really exciting. So that's something we can do.
Okay, and then a question from Don. How do computational scientists typically collaborate with chemists, biologists, and clinicians in a medtech or pharma environment?
Yeah, great question. Historically, we would often be a bit siloed. That's the term, meaning that we work in our own containers. So the clinicians wouldn't necessarily talk to the engineers. And then the engineers wouldn't necessarily talk to the business people. And then the regulators wouldn't talk to any of us unless we talk to them. So yeah, it does get really tricky. How do we know? How do we break down those barriers? Well, the good news is the majority of universities now, I'm referring to the top universities internationally, have these programs like the biodesign program, where they bring together deliberately what some people call unholy alliances.
Sorry to butt in. What's the biodesign program?
Say it again, sir.
I didn't quite hear you. I think you said the biodesign program. What's that?
Yes. Yeah. So the biodesign program was originally launched by Stanford University, and it's called the Stanford Biodesign Program out of the United States. And I mentioned it briefly in my talk, but I know everyone joins at different times. That's fine. So the biodesign program is essentially a year-long experience which brings together these unusual alliances of engineers, healthcare professionals, business people, organizes them into teams, and provides an immersive experience with lots of training, lots of lectures, lots of workshops, lots of just day-to-day experience in clinical settings. And that allows computational scientists, clinicians, and others to come together and start to innovate, and innovate in a way where they are understanding a clear clinical need, which they've learned about through the immersion that happens first. I've been privileged to provide a few lectures to the biodesign program in Helsinki in Finland. I'm not actively involved, but I'm aware of the biodesign process. If you don't want to attend a year-long experience, that's okay. There's a book, and there's lots of resources on their own website. That's the Stanford Biodesign Program. So biodesign, all one word. So other ways to bring people together, I was just about to say that I think there are plenty of departments now at good universities internationally that, and I'm sure Nottingham will have one, where you guys mostly are connected this evening, where it's almost like a tech transfer kind of hub, where you get it's encouraged for different academics, different researchers, different students from different backgrounds to come together to innovate together. And I think a lot of universities now are starting to have departments like this. So, for example, I'm still currently a visiting research fellow at Aalto University in Helsinki in Finland. And you might find this funny, I'm in the department of neuroscience and biomedical engineering. Now, there aren't many departments with that name, because you've got literally engineers, scientists, healthcare people, all in one place. And it just doesn't happen very often. So that's a great department to be affiliated with, Department of Neuroscience and Biomedical Engineering. So I think we're seeing this change, this renaissance in universities, and also in commercial settings, the big companies, big pharmaceutical companies, they're not just looking at working with one area of technology. They try and bring together the various expertise that they know is required for sustainable medtech development. So it's starting to happen already, but go and find those spaces, those events where those people come together, and just join in, really. Have a good time.
Thank you. Can I chime in with another question as well?
Sure thing.
I was reading recently about the 1090 gap early on today, and I was wondering what your thoughts were on it in terms of roughly 10% of global research funding, only 90% of the global disease burden. Yeah.
Yeah, this is an unfortunate reality that I've noticed throughout my career. So to clarify, there's a huge amount of funding that goes towards, particularly in research, goes towards the common disorders of longevity, and not necessarily where the healthcare burdens are in the world. The conditions such as tuberculosis, HIV/AIDS, and so on, and many, many others, malaria, for example. So that is an unfortunate consequence of where the funding may originate. And it's something that I've struggled with throughout my career, right back to my early days as a natural scientist from around 2002 in Cambridge. I remember distinctly we had an assignment on this very topic. And it saddens me that the situation hasn't really changed in the last 20 years. I think it is an unfortunate symptom of the fact that whether you're in big industry or you're a research charity or you're a government organization, people want to see sustainability of research, and therefore there is an expectation of a return on investment. So what that means is that typically research funding goes into those areas which are more likely to involve, as I mentioned, illnesses of longevity. And that's because there are more established healthcare systems in place that can fund the technologies that may help with those disorders. And it bothers me greatly. I mean, I'll be blunt with you. It really bothers me greatly. It's something that hasn't, well, I mean, I think in my career so far, I'm seeing more of a shift towards managing disorders of the developing world, but then we have massive changes due to the political landscape, particularly in North America. So hopefully these things swing, and I can only be optimistic for a swing in the direction of taking care of illnesses that really, really matter to many, many, many people on this planet. A good example is we're running out of antibiotics because antimicrobial resistance internationally is accelerating because bacteria are very good at avoiding our antibiotics. That's going to be an enormous healthcare challenge and an enormous environmental challenge for the future as well.
Okay, and so the next question by Aquimist. In your experience, do smaller startups have much success in markets, or can these often be outcompeted by well-established companies, especially with larger clients like the NHS?
Yes, so it's a great question. So can the small fish beat the big fish? It's kind of the question, isn't it? The answer is yes, they can. And it really depends on how they innovate and in what space they innovate. What is their niche? So some of the big organizations will typically have certain departments that are focused on certain areas. And if you come along as a small startup and you try and target what is already being well worked on by the big boys, yeah, that's not necessarily the best strategy. And that's because often, you know, for your small startup to gain traction in a space where others are already innovating, it is very, very difficult. What tends to happen in relation to this question is if you get a small startup, perhaps created by universities or a small company bringing together, you know, great 3 or 4 great individuals, is if the products and services that they create start to gain traction, they will possibly be bought out or partnered up with a larger player in the space. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. The key point is to be very targeted in the niche in which your expertise lies, having the right expertise involved. But if your small company is likely to become part of a bigger company in the future, so be it. Most entrepreneurs will have a project for a certain amount of time, and then they'll move on to another project anyway. So it's not anything to be too shy about. Again, we learn so much from the journey.
So I think that's everything in the chat. But if anyone else has any questions and like to unmute, please feel free.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure talking with you. And your questions have been right on the money. I'm clearly with an audience tonight of of people who have a strong medtech interest, and that's phenomenal, because I think it's important to have that at an early stage of our careers. Mine has developed a little bit later, as I said. I sort of got quite far along the pathway before becoming a clinical consultant. In around 2019, I started to work more with companies. And there are so many avenues. I think just being in the right space, having the right conversation, you can start to really contribute in ways that work for you. And I think it's important to protect your time. Something I would say on the career side of things is, if you have an interest in this space, we can't do everything. It's tough enough just moving through our degree program or whatever stage we're at. And I think it's important, therefore, to ensure that we have some ring-fence time. Therefore, joining some of the programs like the Stanford Biodesign program, which runs in many different places. There is one here in Oxford where we run. Yeah, having that protected time to innovate is crucial, rather than trying to squeeze too much into our lives.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for your time today. I think everyone's really appreciated having you here.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for listening. I've lots to share. Please do reach out via @Dr. Nick Hayward. There's so much more we can discuss, and we can keep the conversation going, keep it flowing. I'll be happy to help in the future, and I wish you all the very best.
Thank you, Dr. Nick. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Doctor.
I think that's it. I think we're finished. So thank you once again.